The opinions expressed are those of the host. The material is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute investment advice, and it is not intended as an endorsement for any specific investment. Visit crestmontpw.com for more details.
Welcome to the Ascent. This is Sam McGee, the CEO and owner of Crestmont Private Wealth. We have offices in Houston, Texas, and Boerne, Texas, and we serve clients all across the United States and actually some across the globe. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about Third Culture Kids, a book that is really interesting, near and dear to me because I lived in Singapore, I lived in the UK, and grew up mostly in Texas. But it really resonated with me as a parent and as a working professional. But also there's people out there listening to this that have lived overseas, been on different assignments, and you should check out the book. It's not an endorsement. You can get it at the public library, Third Culture Kids. Really interesting perspective. We're going to talk a little bit about that today and then parlay into a couple tips related to working overseas from a financial perspective. Being a third culture kid, I grew up the kid of a oil and gas engineer at Conoco, now ConocoPhillips, and we lived in London in 1979 through 1981, and I went to a British school. Now, keep in mind, previous to this, I lived in Ponca City, which is a tiny little refinery town up north of Oklahoma City, just outside of an Indian reservation. And you move over at the ripe age of 4 years old, and you go into a British public school. Kind of different, right? A little bit of culture shock. So I go over there, and I can still remember just being the different kid, right? And growing up overseas and not having access to things that, back then there was no internet, there was no cable TV. It was, hey, the only American thing you're going to get is by an importer that buys maybe a chocolate bar that you like, or maybe the USA Today or something like that. And so it was a really interesting experience, and I'm not alone. There are tons of people probably listening to this right now that went, oh yeah, I was on assignment in Brisbane, Australia, or I was on assignment in Indonesia or China or somewhere else for my job or through my duty in the military. If you're listening to this and you have kids that had that international experience, I'm here to tell you that, yes, it does come with some challenges, but the book, Third Culture Kids, really goes into the pluses and some of the headwinds that come from raising kids in a separate culture. And I think without going over the entire book and having a big spoiler alert, there's one particular chapter that I really, really enjoyed and it really resonated with me. And it's that third culture kids that live overseas, they will relate to others through shared stories. A typical way to relate to others is through shared experiences. But if you're a third culture kid and you lived, say, in India on a job assignment your family had, and you run into another third culture kid and you say, they happen to be there in that same area, and they go, oh yeah, do you remember the such and such at the market or this particular cultural thing that happened? And all of a sudden, boom, instant connection, instant bond. Think about if you're a Texas A&M Aggie as an example. The Aggie ring, okay? I know this is going to upset some Longhorns, but you see somebody with an Aggie ring, and it's like a shared experience instantly. You see that Aggie ring, and you go, oh, wow, you get me, right? It's that same concept. So if you're listening to this and you were on a military assignment or with a company overseas and you had kids or you currently have kids in school, they are gaining some pretty tremendous worldview, perspective, and really broadening the possibilities for their future. And yet they are going to see and experience the world differently than had they just been in the United States the entire time. Now, there are pros and cons to this. I moved 16 times. I'll give you the rundown. Born in Oklahoma, went to London, back to Houston. When I came back to Houston, I had a half British accent, half Texas accent. And very funny story. We were driving down I-10 outside of Houston in my mom's Volvo. I can picture it, bronze, ugly, ugly car, and it broke all the time. I think my mom ran over some road trash on I-10, and I could hear the tire going flat. And I said, Mummy, the tar is flat. So I mixed British with Texas. Now, I've heard of Spanglish, but I've never heard of that, right? So that's another funny thing for third culture kids is reassimilating into, the U.S. culture, coming back into your home country, and you've picked up some things that you learned over there, and you've got to kind of relearn and reorient. So some of you listening to this might be on overseas assignment with Chevron, ConocoPhillips, maybe with BP, Shell. If you're a parent, you're listening to this, well, I turned out okay, I think. I'm here, I'm doing this podcast, and I survived it. I went from a private school in England to a public school in Houston, back to a private school in Singapore, and back to a public school in Houston. And I lived to tell the story today. So I think what's interesting about Third Culture Kids, really good book, very, very long. It's probably 300 plus pages. The very interesting thing about this is being able to see the impact of overseas travel, living overseas, and what that can do for you as an adult and as a kid and as a adult now, former kid living overseas. Now, the reason we talk about this is because at Crestmont Private Wealth, we do work with a number of families that are on overseas assignment. As long as you don't work in a sanctioned country, you can have wealth management services here in the United States. Now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit back to finance, and I'm going to relate this not to third culture kids, but I'm going to relate this back to you are a working professional, you're overseas, you need wealth management services, you want wealth management services, and yet you're in a completely different time zone. There are options. There's the do-it-yourself option. There's your employer-sponsored benefit plans. And then there are wealth advisors that do work with expats. We happen to be one of them. Crestmont Private Wealth. You can find us at crestmontpw.com. We have our list of services on the web. And we do happen to work with high net worth, high earning professionals that do get relocated overseas. Something interesting about that, relating back to the finances and thinking about being overseas, is there are special rules and special considerations that I'm going to touch on. A few special considerations for those working overseas. So point number one, most custodians do not allow you to invest in U.S. mutual funds while you are abroad, unless it's your 401k. Very little known, interesting fact. So I'm not going to get into the details of the why and the legalese with that, but if you are overseas and you are invested in U.S. mutual funds, you probably ought to be checking in with your custodian, your advisor, to make sure that you're not out of compliance. The last thing you want to have happen is have your account frozen while you're overseas because you make a call from South Korea and call in and find out, oh, wow, you're overseas. We're going to go ahead and freeze your account until you're in compliance. That actually does happen. That does happen. Point number two, while you're overseas, have digital copies of your passports. Have digital copies of your wills with your advisors. At Crestmont Private Wealth, we have a secure, encrypted, 256-bit encrypted personal vault that you can share with your family, friends, who you designate, your advisors, to keep these important documents. That's for our clients in case they get lost. And these things happen. We've seen cases where folks go overseas, they work, they get busy, they misplace something, boom, their passports are gone. So they got to go to the embassy and get those reissued. Don't be that person. Point number three, while you're overseas, typically your taxes can become a bit of an issue because you are in not your home country. Most employers are going to provide you with tax services. Some of the bigger names will provide tax prep services for you to do equalization, and they have an HR team that typically will help you sort through all those complexities. And what we've seen is when a worker is overseas and they come back to the U.S., the company that has been paying for the tax services will typically keep you on the service for a couple years. Now, is this out of the goodness of their heart? Somewhat, because there's foreign tax credits involved here. You may find that 2-3 years into this, you get reissued a W-2 all of a sudden and you've got a tax issue. We've seen this. Now, it's something we're familiar with and something that is not a big surprise at Crestmont Private Wealth when we're working with expats. But that's really the third piece, of something that's a nugget that I thought I would share. And maybe one little extra here is when a client who works in the United States, and that's not their home country, and they want to return to their home country, such as the UK, Scotland, Germany, et cetera, we can actually work with those folks. We work with a custodian that does allow for that. Now, as long as they're not on a sanctioned country, we can absolutely do that. There are specific rules. There are tax nuances, and always consult your tax advisor in your home country and the United States. We are not CPAs, but that is something that can be done. So as we think about third culture kids, and as you're sitting here maybe listening to this, and maybe you were on a former assignment and you're back and retired in the U.S., maybe you're going overseas, maybe you have friends that are overseas, send them this show. We are on iHeartRadio, most of the major podcasts, and you can sign up for our emails where we can actually send you this weekly reminder of this show, not just on Boerne Radio here locally. And you can sign up by emailing me at sam@crestmontpw.com. Again, that is sam@crestmontpw.com. We'd be happy to send you a copy of this show, and you can also subscribe to our channel and see all the shows that we've been doing here in Boerne, Texas. Today, we've been talking about third culture kids, what it's like to live overseas, the different perspectives. We've talked a little bit about a couple nuggets of financial tidbits of being an overseas worker and the pitfalls of that. And if you happen to be in that situation and you need an advisor, being someone that has lived overseas 3 times and loved it, but now as a professional, we advise clients that are in this situation. You need the help? Reach out to us, sam@crestmontpw.com, or you can find us on the web at crestmontpw.com and see all our services and a little bit about us. I hope you have a great weekend, and God bless.